Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tim Rex Goodness.
So good.
With the release of The Avengers Infinity War this weekend, and the drop of the new Venom movie trailer, I figured why not talk about more superhero films? Makes sense. Out of the many comic book movies that have come out within the past 20 years, what are some of the most hated? How about Batman and Robin, Catwoman, Dawn of Justice, Green Lantern? Yeah, those suck, but you'd probably find on any of these lists is, of course, because you read the title, Spider-Man 3. So many critics and audience members alike hate Spider-Man 3 with a burning passion. For me personally, this movie and I have a very complicated relationship. When it first came out, I was still in elementary school. Yeah, it's that old, or I'm that young. And for a little Tyrannosaurine, a Spider-Man movie is always amazing. However, as I got older and more critical of everything, Spider-Man 3 was one of the many childhood memories that got burned at the stake, along with the Star Wars prequels, Jurassic Park 3, and those awful Disney Channel movies. But as I progress further, I find myself starting to enjoy it again and see some sunbeams of hope in this cumulonimbus of a movie. Now, many of you may remember me briefly giving my thoughts on the film in some of my other videos, but as you've probably already figured out, my feelings are too complex to be summed up into a short, "it sucks," or "I had a fun time." Do I think it deserves to be heavily criticized? Certainly. Should it be ranked among the atrocities I mentioned previously? Is Spider-Man 3 really that awful? Without further hesitation, let's dive into the mess that is Spider-Man 3. Easily, the strangest aspect of this movie is the characters. There are so many boneheaded decisions made with the people we grew to love over the past two movies that it feels like a sabotage mission took place at Sony during the writing of this screenplay. But then there are elements that I feel have a ton of potential, but never quite reach their intended heights. Starting off positive, because that's what my psychiatrist tells me to do, I agree with the direction taken with Peter Parker, in that he's becoming overwhelmed by his newfound popularity as Spider-Man. Remember, this dude was just a nerdy guy in high school with two friends who both hate his guts half the time, earns almost no money, and never gets his pizza time. He's been down on his luck for pretty much his entire life. As Spidey, however, the whole city loves him, and it's more than he knows how to deal with. This kind of thing happens all the time in real life. Completely unknown kids are suddenly struck with fame, and we love to watch their lives fall apart as good entertainment. Think Miley Cyrus, Justin Bieber, and the yodeling Walmart kid. It makes sense as the direction taken, and it's not a stretch to see this pride contribute to Peter taking on the symbiote suit. Okay, nobody's gonna forgive me for this, but I like the James Brown street dance scene. Yeah, it's over the top and corny, but this is Sam Raimi we're talking about. This is what happens when a young man lets the fame get to his head. He does stupid stunts like this. It also serves as a good juxtaposition to Spider-Man 2's BJ Thomas sequence, in which we see a humble, innocent, yet free Peter. Notice the white, and then the black. You have the lovable Peter, and then the arrogant one. However, I'm not going to stand here and defend the jazz club scene. No, one embarrassing moment is enough. You don't need to keep pushing it. Also, Spider-Man 2 was able to have Peter make mistakes, but present them in such a way that you still want him to be happy. Yeah, he's given up on superheroing, but look how happy he is. You still like him. 3 fails to replicate this. You just want to punch this guy in the face for the things he does, like constantly bragging about himself, using women, kissing another girl, knowing his girlfriend's watching, and then not understanding why his girlfriend would be upset about this. There's certainly a balance that isn't struck between likability and character flaws. So again, this is an example of a good idea not quite done as well as possible, which is why I find it so hard to judge Spider-Man 3 one way or another. Then there's Mary Jane. MJ seems to always be opposed to Peter in terms of success. When Pete was at his lowest in the second film, she was off getting engaged to a famous astronaut. Now when he's wildly successful as Spider-Man, she's getting booted off Broadway and stuck working at a jazz club. The movie wants us to sympathize with her, but she ends up even less sympathetic than Peter. Mary Jane constantly wants attention and for Peter to comfort her, even though she doesn't tell him about getting fired. Then, when he isn't comforting her because he's left in the dark, she snaps at him and goes to mac on his best friend. Like, bruh. The relationship between the two is insanely toxic. There is literally no communication here. So many of their problems could have easily been avoided if they just told each other all the crazy things going on. And there's no reason for this secretiveness. It's ridiculous. Like I just mentioned, MJ doesn't tell Peter about being let go, and she also doesn't tell him that Harry threatened his life if she didn't break up with him. Why wouldn't she tell him this? Spider-Man has fought 3 other supervillains by this point. It should be safe to assume he can take on Harry. Peter isn't innocent in this either. He, for some reason, chooses not to tell MJ about Harry hating his guts. Just one quick exchange about it would have spared us from this whole nightmare.
Just like this. Come on, little fish, and do the twist.
One more thing about her. How come every one of these movies needs to end in her getting kidnapped and needing to be saved? Come on, that's ridiculous. MJ should be treated better as a character instead of a constant damsel in distress. As for the side characters, thankfully they're all still as good as they were in the previous movies. Aunt May doesn't get nearly as much screen time as before, but Rosemary Harris is still the definitive Aunt May. She still does her job by serving as Peter's moral compass in all this, and her speeches are still good. Not Spider-Man 2 levels of good, but good. J.K. Simmons is still at his best here as J. Jonah Jameson. Certainly one of my favorite actors to watch on screen. He's still funny as ever, and this time with a funny gag about needing to keep his blood pressure under control. Sadly, there's no Mr. Aziz in this one, but Mr. Dickovich and his daughter Ursula still get some great moments. For the characters as a whole, it's a mixed bag. MJ sucks here. Peter's dilemma is pushed to the extreme several times, but there are still some good ideas in there, and side characters that are just as memorable as they were before. Probably the most widely criticized part of Spider-Man 3 is how it juggles its villains. Everything in this one comes in threes. It's the third film, has 3 villains, and 3 dance scenes. What's often commented is how the overabundance of subplots and villains causes them to fight one another for screen time as opposed to fighting Spider-Man. This is something I certainly agree with. The first villain we get is Harry as the New Goblin, also known as
Little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
In my opinion, he should be the main villain here, instead of just another one of them. The entire trilogy has been setting him up to be the ultimate adversary. Here, he's at the climax of his multi-movie character arc, and that should be given more weight than it is. Harry's been driven to insanity by constantly seeking the approval of his father, and once Norman dies, has nothing left but avenging him to try to make up for being a disappointment. And after all this build-up, he gets amnesia? A great game, but this adds nothing besides removing him from the picture to introduce another villain, the Sandman, aka the sympathetic villain because audiences responded well to that in the last one, so we're gonna dial it up to 11. You can tell that they're really trying hard to make us care about him because he's stealing money for his sick daughter. Aww. Sad? Yeah. Necessary for the purposes of the film? No. Even though I appreciate the performance given by Thomas Hayden Church, Sandman could easily be cut out of the whole picture to give more room to develop other characters and ideas. And then there's the whole Uncle Ben retcon, that the guy in the first one wasn't the real killer, but the accomplice of Flint Marko who accidentally killed everyone's favorite rice. Oh, come on. Uncle Ben's death was just an accident? If it's just an accident, then that robs Peter of the guilt that motivates him to be Spider-Man. It's not Peter's fault for letting the robber get away. No, it's just a simple misunderstanding. What? After getting the black suit, Spider-Man takes him out of the picture, and then we go back to Harry, who suddenly remembers everything, and that whole debacle continues. The final villain, as we all know, is Venom. Once Peter decides to ditch the symbiote, it finds a new host in Eddie Brock, a girly, disgruntled photographer who competes with Peter for a Bugle staff job. Usually, Brock is portrayed as some insanely buff, angry dude, willing to punch anyone and anything, so I get the shock audiences must have felt when hearing that Topher Grace would play the part. The thing is that, once again, I get what they were going for. Eddie shows us who Peter could be if he loses his kind nature and becomes, well, this. As opposed to the poor college kid who life keeps beating over the head, Eddie is an entitled jerk who's willing to do anything and undercut anyone to get ahead. And he acts like a player. We see Peter turning into this throughout the course of the movie, so it's all there, but watching this guy prance around on screen does become obnoxious, and it's made even worse once he does get the symbiote. He just keeps complaining and whining in that unmasculine voice. Here's what Venom should be like.
Why don't we introduce you to our better half? We call ourselves Venom.
Now here's Topher Grace crying.
We can find a way to settle this.
You're so right. I'm thinking humiliation. Kind of like how you humiliated me. Do you remember? Do you remember what you did to me?
Oh, also, he doesn't say we or have the tongue. That's two big minuses right there for Spider-Man 3 that the new Venom movie seems to have nailed. One of the reasons why I find it so upsetting that so many people immediately dismiss Spider-Man 3 is because it was truly trying. The filmmakers really wanted it to be about something special, and it shows on screen. The problem comes because there are too many eggs in this basket, so none of the ideas are able to reach their maximum potential. The biggest theme here is hatred. We see throughout the film many characters overtaken by their hate, as they let it turn them into monsters. Peter becomes hateful of Marco for killing his uncle, and that becomes what the symbiote feeds off of. This hatred becomes so prevalent in Peter's mind that he even goes as far as to attempt to kill Sandman. Yeah, that's probably too far for Spidey, especially this early on into his bond with the suit. Harry is consumed by his hatred of Spider-Man, who he now knows as Peter, for killing his father in the first movie, or so he thinks. He voids up, wears a snowboarder getup, and rides around trolling his friends. Despite the past mistakes of these two, they eventually realize that they have been overtaken by a monster, literally for Peter, and break free from the hate that controls them. Eddie, on the other hand, never lets go. He goes further and further down the wrong path and ends up loving to hate. Once he gets the symbiote, he becomes a literal and metaphorical monster. Holding on to his lust for vengeance and negative emotions is what eventually kills him in the end. Harry also dies for some reason, even though he let go of those feelings, but whatever, we'll get to that soon. And this movie stopped caring about making sense the moment a plot device literally fell from the sky. The other big idea in Spider-Man 3 is redemption. Many people make mistakes, go to the dark side, and have to learn from those mistakes and be redeemed. First off, there is of course Peter, who dons the alien suit, attempts murder, assaults Harry, slaps MJ, and shakes too hard. By the end of the second act, he realizes the monster he's becoming, breaks his bond with the symbiote, and gets restored to his former self. There's even a shower scene symbolizing baptism after he ditches the suit. Sam Raimi is trying so hard here, but this idea doesn't follow through or is done wrong. For example, again, Harry. He becomes consumed by hate, hurts his friends, is redeemed before the finale, and then dies? What? What happened to his redemption arc? I don't understand why the writers would kill off Harry. In fact, his rap sheet is just as long as, if not shorter than Peter's. He kisses his best friend's girlfriend, attempts to kill his best friend, and then uses MJ to break Peter's heart. Heck, even Sandman gets away scot-free after murdering so many people and robbing banks. Maybe I'm overreacting to this, but I'm not upset about the idea of Harry dying itself, but the theme of redemption breaks apart at the seams when the man who has done the least gets the greatest punishment, even after turning away from his dark path. Do only some people get redemption, while others are destined to suffer forever no matter what? It doesn't make sense. What about Mary Jane? How does she get redeemed after being the worst girlfriend ever? This movie. The one thing I do agree gets done well in Spider-Man 3 is the symbiote. Using it as an analogy for hatred or drugs or any other addictive thing is a good idea and a great throwback to the animated series. And unlike the other good ideas, the movie actually sees this one through to the end. Okay, wow, that was a good mental exercise. Now for the action. This is probably the greatest redeeming quality of Spider-Man 3. Despite everything I just said, it's still a ton of fun to watch because it was sure to end the trilogy with a bang. There's not a dull moment the whole way through. Even though having 3 villains crammed into one movie doesn't work on a writing level, it certainly provides a lot of unique fight scenes throughout, like the initial battle with Harry, the Great Sandman showdown where Spidey literally surfs on the street, nope, I'm not gonna mention it. Probably the best one where Harry and Peter brawl in the mansion, and the finale. Man, but that fight between Peter and Harry is exactly what the series was building up to after years of growing tension between the two. It certainly didn't disappoint. And okay, even though the final battle can get silly and whiny, I'm sure there wasn't a single human soul in any theater who wanted it to end. Overall, I wouldn't say the fight sequences are as good as but they're still wildly enjoyable. I said before that the side characters are as good as they've always been, and that certainly is true, especially when it comes to the comedy. Some of the trilogy's best moments come from this movie. Not the dancing scenes, I mean. You get Jameson taking his pills, Peter using Ursula to bake cookies, a little girl ripping off Jameson in the end, and of course Bruce Campbell is as good as ever as the host of a fancy French restaurant. Man, I really miss his cameos. You think the Stan Lee ones are funny? Ha! And even though Pizza Time has a special place in my heart, there are so many memorable lines like,
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye. Find us some shade. Thanks, Hot Mix.
The taste. Strawberries.
and of course, you can't forget the soundtrack. Even though Danny Elfman signed off after Spider-Man 2, Christopher Young comes and really picks up the slack. The main Spider-Man theme is just as perfect as always, and some of the new stuff is fantastic. The stinger for the symbiote is perfect. It's so good that it gets stuck in my head whenever I do something bad, like making my friend draw 4 in Uno. The Sandman score is also very fitting. It sounds all dirty and gross. However, I wish some of the Green Goblin stuff came back around for this one with Harry. All the villains in the series get fantastic scores, but him sadly. And since he's the second Goblin, it makes sense to bring back the old Goblin theme. So, Spider-Man 3 doesn't quite work as a deep movie with important concepts and morals, but hey, it's still enjoyable as a brain-dead popcorn flick and a farm for memes. There are tons of little problems and details that are off in this movie, and I think I'd be selling you guys short if I didn't mention them, so I'm gonna give you an organized list of complaints. 1. Why on earth didn't the police notify Peter and Aunt May years ago that they caught the wrong guy? Shouldn't they at least know who killed a member of their family? 2. This film gets so lazy that to introduce the symbiote, it has to fall out of the sky and land right next to our protagonist.
As if the answers to all your problems will fall right out of the sky. Fall right out of the sky.
Out of all the places on Earth, it lands right next to where Peter is on that one night in Central Park. 3. Why does Marco punch a dog? Aww. 4. Why does Sandman have such a casual reaction to Venom? He just tosses him back and walks away like nothing happened. Has he seen dozens of alien monsters before? 5. How does Norman's wound being caused by the glider prove Peter innocent? How does that prove Norman killed himself? Couldn't Spider-Man have taken the glider and stabbed him with it, like Venom does to Harry? And why does Bernard wait so long to tell Harry? Maybe he could have told Harry before he tried to kill his friend and got half of his face blown off? 6. How was Eddie able to figure out that Peter's Spider-Man? And how did he know about Mary Jane and where she lived? The symbiote's qualities are never explained, so we don't know if it told Eddie or what. And how did he know MJ would need a cab and at exactly that moment? 7. Where did Harry get all his supplies from? 8. When the symbiote attaches to Peter, it attaches to his suit, yet later on we see them separate. And how did it form the mask? Peter wasn't wearing the mask when they bonded. 9. MJ sounded fine, at least from what we can tell, Why was she fired? 'Cause she wasn't loud enough? Isn't that the sound technician's fault? Doesn't Broadway give their performers mics? And 10, because that's a clean number to end on. What is Norman Osborn? Is he a ghost? Is he a figment of Harry's imagination going crazy? That's my answer, but then how can his mind remind itself of everything it forgot when he got amnesia? I don't think that's how amnesia works. If Norman's a ghost, then why did he wait 2 years to start talking to Harry in number 2? And why does he wait until Harry has a cooking date with MJ to re-jog his memory? It doesn't make sense. Okay, I can keep going on with flaws and nitpicks for eternity, but that's enough now. This has been a long journey in dissecting the ins and outs of Spider-Man 3. After seeing this, do you still think it's on par with Hulk or Elektra or the Amazing Spider-Mans? Is it really that awful? I definitely don't think so. No, stop, I'm serious.
You serious?
Just the fact that there's so much to sift through in terms of themes and characters shows how much Sam Raimi tried to make this one as great as its predecessors, unlike The Amazing Spider-Man that didn't do anything new or interesting. My biggest problem with Spider-Man 3 is how close it was to truly being amazing. You could see all the pieces there, all the brilliant ideas that didn't quite play out the way they should have. The amount of potential here is astounding. I feel as though it could have easily been one of the best comic book movies to date if it just went through one more draft. It aims to swing so high, yet ends up falling so far. I hate that feeling. You can see the awesome movie right there. At least what's left is still an enjoyable watch. If you want a handful of cheap entertainment, go watch this movie. You won't regret it. It's tons of fun. But when the expectations are so high from Spider-Man 2, and you end up with just a fun movie that ends up falling apart on a writing level, of course everyone's gonna be disappointed. But to end on a positive note, at least we still have pizza time. Oh, and I know last week I said there'd be an episode on Spectacular Spider-Man, not Spider-Man 3, but I was writing it, and I felt as though I didn't have much of anything new to say that hasn't been said or that I didn't say in my Spider-Man 2 analysis. And I'm not sure if anyone would even want to see a video on that. If you do, let me know, but as for now, that episode's cancelled. Also, with the drop of the Venom trailer, it just makes sense to release this episode now. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. See you next week.